Americans are starting to lose interest in everything, and it's concerning. And the reason I know that is not because I read a study. It is because you picked up your phone last night at around 10:30 and you were not looking for anything. You were not expecting a message. You were not checking something specific. You just picked it up, the way you always do. And you scrolled through nothing. Past faces you do not know, saying things you will not remember about topics that do not matter to you. And somewhere around 11:15, you put the phone down and you stared at the ceiling and you felt something that was not sadness and was not anger and was not anxiety, but was heavier than all three, and you could not name it. And the person lying next to you, if there was one, did not ask what was wrong because they were doing the same thing on their phone on the other side of the bed. And this morning you woke up tired in a way that sleep does not fix. That feeling has a name. Psychologists did not have a word for it until 2021. Because an entire population had never experienced it at this scale before. Half the American workforce has quietly quit their jobs. But the quitting did not stop at the office. It followed them home, into their hobbies, their friendships, their marriages, their plans, their appetite for the future. 54% of American adults report feeling isolated. 90% say the country is in a mental health crisis. Consumer sentiment is at a 46-year low, and 264,000 Americans are dying of despair every year, not from poverty in the traditional sense, from the absence of a reason to keep going. And the thing that should terrify you is not that so many people feel this way. It is that the system you live inside was designed to make you feel this way. Because a population that has lost interest in everything is the easiest population to extract from and the hardest population to organize against the extraction. Your numbness is not a failure of the system. It is the system's highest achievement. There is a word for what you have been feeling, and it is not depression, and it is not anxiety, and it is not burnout. It is something psychologists did not even have a clinical term for until 21, because an entire population had never experienced it at this scale before. The feeling that millions of Americans are walking around with right now, the one that the woman in the video described as a giant emotional fog hanging over everything. The one that the man described as not enjoying anything anymore without being depressed. The one that the nurse said changed people permanently after 2020 has a name. The name is languishing. And it was introduced into the mainstream psychological vocabulary in April 2021 by organizational psychologist Adam Grant in a New York Times article that became the most read piece the newspaper published that entire year. Not because it was dramatic, because it was accurate. Grant described languishing as the neglected middle child of mental health. It is not depression, which is the inability to function. It is not burnout, which is the inability to continue working at a demanded pace. It is not anxiety, which is the constant anticipation of threat. It is the absence of well-being, the absence of purpose, the absence of engagement with your own life, the feeling of staring at your phone at 11 p.m., scrolling through nothing, looking for nothing, waiting for nothing, and not being able to explain why you are doing it or why you cannot stop. The feeling of waking up on a Saturday morning with no obligations and no plans and no desire to make any. The feeling of someone asking you what you want to do, and the honest answer being, I do not know and I do not care. And those two things feeling the same. And in 2021, Grant described it as the dominant emotion of the pandemic. But here is what nobody expected. The pandemic ended. And the languishing did not. It deepened. It spread. It evolved from a temporary psychological response to a lockdown into a permanent baseline state for a measurable percentage of the American population. The American Psychological Association's 2025 Stress in America survey found that 54% of American adults felt isolated. 54%, and 50% felt left out. Half the country feels disconnected from the life happening around them. And the Gallup State of the Global Workplace report found that only 23% of employees worldwide are engaged at work. In the United States, that number was 33%, meaning 2/3 of American workers go to their jobs every day and feel nothing about them. Not hatred, not passion, nothing. And the 2026 Psychological Safety Study, published by the Center for Organizational Effectiveness, which drew on anonymized clinical conversations with workers at over 100,000 companies employing 88 million people, found that the number one concern impeding psychological safety was work-life balance. Specifically, it described a state where job demands consistently exceed the time and energy workers have to meet them. And the study asked the question that names the entire epidemic in a single sentence. Does the work matter to the person doing it? And for 2/3 of the American workforce, the answer is no. And the loss of meaning is not limited to work. It extends into every dimension of life. Church attendance has fallen from 70% to 45%. Civic organization membership is at historic lows. Voter participation saw 88 million abstentions in 2024. The fertility rate is at the lowest in the country's history because people who cannot find meaning in their own existence are not inclined to create new existence. And the hobby industry, which tracks spending on activities people do for pleasure, has reported declines in participation across every major category from 2019 to 2025, including sports, crafting, gardening, reading, and outdoor recreation. Americans are not just losing interest in work. They are losing interest in living. Not in the suicidal sense, though 264,000 deaths of despair per year suggest that many are. In the languishing sense. In the fog sense. In the I am here but I am not present sense, that the woman in the video named when she said we are all just functioning. That is the word. Functioning, not thriving, not growing, not engaging, not building. Functioning. The minimum viable existence of a population that has been squeezed of purpose by a system that demands productivity but offers no meaning in return. And psychologists did not have a word for it until 2021 because an entire population had never experienced it at this scale. And the fact that they needed to invent a word tells you everything about what is happening to the country. Half the American workforce quietly quit their jobs, and then they quietly quit their friendships and their hobbies and their goals and their plans, and now they are quietly quitting life itself, and the data shows it is accelerating. Gallup conducted a study of 15,000 workers aged 18 and older, and found that approximately half of the U.S. workforce consists of quiet quitters. Half. 50% of working Americans are performing the minimum required duties to maintain employment while investing zero discretionary effort, zero emotional engagement, and zero creative energy into the work they spend 40 to 50 hours per week doing. And the psychological research published in 2025 described quiet quitting, not as laziness but as a psychological defense mechanism. When your brain decides that protecting you matters more than performing, you withdraw. The cortisol system that has been running at chronic stress levels for years begins to shut down the reward pathways. The dopamine response that once made accomplishments feel satisfying stops firing. Your brain, in a biological act of self-preservation, disconnects you from the thing that is hurting you, and for half the workforce, the thing that is hurting them is their job. But here is what the workplace researchers missed, and what the people in the videos at the beginning of this video understand intuitively. The quiet quitting did not stop at the office door. It followed them home. Because the same brain that disconnected from work to protect itself uses the same neurological pathways for everything else. When the reward system stops functioning at work, it does not magically reactivate when you walk through your front door. You carry the disconnection with you into your relationships, into your hobbies, into your friendships. And Pew Research Center found that 72% of U.S. adults rated the economy as only fair or poor in early 2026, while just 28% called it excellent or good. And Gallup found that Americans entered 2026 expecting trouble across 13 separate economic, political, and global areas, with the stock market being the only area where a majority expected improvement. And 60% worry a great deal about the economy, and 59% about healthcare costs, and 56% about inflation, and 52% about Social Security. And the man in the video who said he cannot get a job anywhere despite 10 years of corporate experience at prestigious companies, who said he cannot get a callback, cannot get a referral, who said he gets why people want to check out, is not an outlier. He is the median experience of the American worker in 2026. KPMG documented the second worst year for job gains since the global financial crisis. The Allianz survey found that 71% of employed Americans are job-hugging, clinging to positions out of fear rather than satisfaction. And the 2026 psychological safety study found that the second largest concern after work-life balance was job performance anxiety, a state of chronic worry about being seen as inadequate at a job you do not care about but cannot afford to lose. You are anxious about failing at something you feel nothing about. That is not a psychological paradox. It is the defining emotional state of the American worker in 2026. Afraid of losing the thing they have already mentally abandoned. And the withdrawal is measurable beyond the workplace. Social media engagement per user has been declining since 2023, even as time spent on devices has increased, meaning people are scrolling more but interacting less. They are present on the platforms but not participating. Dating app match rates have declined as message response rates drop, meaning people are swiping but not connecting. Library checkouts are down, gym memberships are up, but attendance per member is declining, meaning people are paying for access they do not use. Concert and live event ticket sales have been flat, despite population growth, meaning proportionally fewer people are choosing to leave their homes for entertainment. The quiet quitting of work has become the quiet quitting of life. And the acceleration is the part that should terrify you, because the people in those videos are not describing something that happened to them once. They are describing something that is happening to them continuously, daily, deepening, without a clear endpoint. The fog is not lifting, it is settling, and the number of people inside it is growing. And 90% of the country says it is a mental health crisis, and they are right. But it is not a crisis in the way a hurricane is a crisis, with a beginning and an end and a cleanup period. It is a crisis in the way an ice age is a crisis, slow, encompassing, reshaping the landscape. And by the time you realize you are inside it, the world you remember is already gone. The reason millions of Americans have lost interest in everything is not psychological. It is mathematical. When 100% of your energy goes to surviving, 0% remains for living, and that equation has become the default setting for the bottom 60% of the country. There is a concept in biology called allostatic load. It refers to the cumulative wear and tear on the body that results from chronic stress. When an organism is under sustained threat, the stress response system, cortisol, adrenaline, elevated heart rate, suppressed digestion, disrupted sleep, runs continuously instead of activating only during acute danger and then shutting off. And the result is not dramatic collapse. It is gradual depletion. The organism does not die suddenly, it wears down. Its immune system weakens, its cognitive function declines, its emotional range narrows. Its capacity for pleasure, for curiosity, for engagement, for hope, erodes one day at a time until the organism is technically alive but no longer living in any meaningful sense. And the United States in 2026 has placed the bottom 60% of its population under an allostatic load that clinical researchers have never documented at this scale in a developed nation. The math is the engine. Credit card debt at $1.252 trillion at 23.79% APR. That is the highest interest rate in the history of the Federal Reserve's tracking. And 111 million Americans cannot pay their balance in full. And the minimum payment on a $6,000 balance, which is approximately the national average, sends $119 of every $120 to interest and $1 to principal. You are paying $120 per month to reduce your debt by $1. That is not finance. That is extraction. And the extraction consumes cognitive resources. Behavioral economists have documented that financial scarcity reduces effective IQ by approximately 13 points, the equivalent of losing an entire night's sleep. The brain that is calculating whether to pay the electric bill or the credit card minimum this month does not have the cognitive surplus to plan a vacation, to pursue a hobby, to read a book for pleasure, to engage in a conversation that is not about money, to experience the kind of spontaneous joy that requires mental space that financial stress has eliminated. And gas is at $4.55 and climbing. And the grocery bill reflecting $117, Brent and $6.30 diesel is arriving in September with a 15 to 30% increase. And the insurance renewal adds $100 to $300 per month. And LIHEP was eliminated for 6 million households, heading into the hottest summer on record. And 45% of households cannot make ends meet. And the savings rate is 4%. And the median household income is $81,000. But the median home requires $110,000 to afford, and childcare costs $15,000 to $25,000 per year. And a 4-year degree costs $80,000 to $200,000. And every single one of these numbers represents a claim on your limited cognitive and emotional bandwidth. Every bill is a calculation. Every calculation is a stress event. Every stress event activates the cortisol system. And the cortisol system, when it runs continuously for months and years, does exactly what the woman in the video described. It creates a fog, a heaviness, an inability to feel pleasure, an emotional flatness that is not depression in the clinical sense, but is functionally identical to it in lived experience. And the man who said he does not enjoy his training anymore is not describing a change in his preferences. He is describing a brain whose reward system has been deactivated by chronic financial stress. The woman who described quiet exhaustion is not describing a personality trait. She is describing allostatic overload. The 21-year-old who said, "What are we even trying for?" is not describing laziness. She is describing a rational response to a mathematical equation where effort produces no visible return. The loss of interest is not a mystery. It is a budget. When every dollar and every minute and every calorie of emotional energy goes to keeping the lights on and the car running and the kids fed and the minimum payments made, the remaining balance for joy, for purpose, for connection, for meaning is zero. And you cannot spend what you do not have. The interest in life did not disappear. It was consumed by the cost of life, and the cost keeps climbing, and the interest keeps shrinking. And the person who used to dream and plan and build and create is now a person who survives, and surviving is all they can afford. Half of American adults report measurable loneliness, and the Surgeon General called it an epidemic. But the part nobody is talking about is that people are not just lonely, they have stopped wanting to connect, and that is a different disease entirely. The Surgeon General's 2023 advisory on loneliness documented that approximately half of American adults experience measurable social isolation, and that the health impact is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes per day. And the APA's 2025 Stress in America survey confirmed the finding with updated data. 54% of adults feel isolated. 50% feel left out. And those numbers should have triggered a national intervention. But the intervention that the advisory assumed would work, reconnecting people through programs and outreach and community building, assumes something that may no longer be true. It assumes people want to connect, and the videos at the beginning of this video suggest something far more disturbing. The people describing their experience are not describing a desire for connection that is being blocked by circumstance. They are describing the absence of the desire itself. The man who said he does not enjoy anything anymore was not describing a lack of access to enjoyable things. He was describing the loss of the capacity to enjoy. The woman who described functioning, the wake up, check phone, go to work, pay bills, scroll, eat, scroll, sleep, rinse and repeat, was not describing a schedule that prevents connection. She was describing a state of being where connection does not register as desirable, and this distinction matters enormously because it changes the nature of the problem. Loneliness in the traditional sense is a hunger. You feel alone. You want company. You seek it. And if the barriers to finding it, distance, time, transportation, social anxiety, are removed, the hunger is satisfied. But what is happening in the United States in 2026 is not traditional loneliness. It is anhedonia applied to social connection. Anhedonia is the clinical term for the inability to experience pleasure from activities that were previously enjoyable. And when anhedonia extends to human relationships, the person does not feel lonely in the way that a hungry person feels hunger. The person feels nothing. The prospect of calling a friend does not produce desire. It produces exhaustion. The idea of going to a gathering does not produce anticipation. It produces dread. Not because the person dislikes their friends, because the neurological system that converts social interaction into positive emotional experience has been damaged by years of chronic stress, information overload, digital substitution, and the cumulative weight of living in a society that demands performance and provides no restoration. And the data supports this beyond the self-reports. The average American adult spends 2 hours and 31 minutes per day on social media platforms. Those platforms provide the simulation of social contact, likes, comments, shares, reactions, without the neurological benefits of actual human presence. Eye contact activates the mirror neuron system. Physical proximity releases oxytocin. Shared laughter synchronizes heart rates. None of these biological mechanisms are activated by a screen. And the brain, which is receiving the signal that social engagement is occurring through the digital input, does not generate the drive to seek the real thing because it believes, incorrectly, that the need is already being met. You are not lonely because you have no friends. You are lonely because the thing that is supposed to make you seek friends has been tricked into believing you already found them. And the friendship recession is documented. The Survey Center on American Life found that the share of Americans who report having no close friends has quadrupled since 1990, going from 3% to 12%. The share with 10 or more close friends dropped from 33% to 13%. And men are disproportionately affected. 20% of single men report having no close friends at all. And the withdrawal compounds. The less you connect, the more the social muscles atrophy. The more they atrophy, the more exhausting connection becomes. The more exhausting it becomes, the less you seek it. And the cycle deepens until the person is not lonely in any way they can articulate. They are simply alone, and they have forgotten what not being alone felt like, and they have stopped wanting to remember. A 21-year-old looked into a camera and said, "What are we even trying for?" And she was not being dramatic. She was performing the most rational cost-benefit analysis of her generation, because the numbers tell her that effort no longer produces outcomes. In the video at the beginning of this one, A 21-year-old woman said something that should have stopped every policymaker, every economist, and every parent in the country. She said, "I do not blame people younger than me who are still in my generation, or even Gen Alpha, just not having a will to try in school, because it is just like, what are we even trying for at this point?" And the reaction that most people over 40 will have to that statement is to dismiss it as youthful entitlement or laziness, or the soft mentality of a generation that was raised with participation trophies. And that reaction is wrong, because the 21-year-old is not being lazy, she is being accurate. She is performing a cost-benefit analysis that the previous generation never had to do, because the previous generation grew up in an economy where effort reliably produced outcomes. A high school diploma reliably produced a manufacturing job that paid $45,000 to $65,000 with benefits and a pension. A college degree reliably produced a white-collar career that paid $55,000 to $80,000 with a clear advancement trajectory. A decade of work reliably produced enough savings for a down payment on a home. And each of those reliable connections between effort and outcome has been severed. The manufacturing jobs were offshored. The white-collar careers are being automated by AI. The college degree now costs $80,000 to $200,000 and produces $31,000 in average debt for outcomes that Gallup says only 36% of the country has confidence will materialize. And the home requires $110,000 in household income, while the median is $81,000. And the 21-year-old can see every one of these numbers on her phone. She is not unaware. She is the most aware generation in human history because she has access to more economic data, more salary transparency through platforms like Glassdoor and Levels. FYI, more housing market data through Zillow and Redfin, and more generational comparison data through social media than any generation before her. And the data tells her that the contract is broken. The contract that said work hard, get a degree, get a job, buy a house, start a family, build a life. Each link in that chain has been cut. The degree is a debt trap. The job market is a mirage, where the second worst year for gains since 2009 meets a 71% job-hugging rate. The house is mathematically impossible, and the family costs $15,000 to $25,000 per year in childcare alone, before you add food, clothing, healthcare, and the $300,000 that the USDA estimates as the total cost of raising a child to 18 in the United States. And Gen Z's response to this broken contract is not rebellion. It is withdrawal. And the withdrawal looks like the loss of interest that this video is about. It looks like not trying in school because the school leads to a degree that leads to a debt that leads to a job market that leads to nowhere. The numbers say is worth going. It looks like not pursuing career advancement because the advancement leads to more hours for marginal income gains that are consumed by the costs that climb faster than the wages. It looks like not dating because dating leads to relationships that lead to marriages, that lead to children, that lead to expenses that the math does not support. It looks like scrolling instead of building, watching instead of doing, existing instead of living. And the 21-year-old is not wrong. The math is on her side. The effort-to-outcome ratio has collapsed for her generation in a way that it never did for the generations that are calling her lazy. And the most dangerous thing about her analysis is not that it is pessimistic, it is that it is correct. When effort reliably produces no outcome, the rational response is to stop trying. And that is what is happening across an entire generation. Not because they are weak, because the system that was supposed to reward effort stopped rewarding it and started extracting from it instead. And a generation that concluded the game is rigged did the only rational thing a person can do with a rigged game. They stopped playing. Your brain's reward system was hijacked by 4 industries that spent billions engineering artificial pleasure, and now your nervous system cannot feel satisfaction at normal human intensity, and that is why nothing feels good anymore. The human brain was not designed for the world it lives in. That is not a philosophical observation. It is a neurological fact. Your dopamine system, the circuitry that produces the sensation of pleasure, motivation, anticipation, and reward, evolved over 200,000 years in an environment where the strongest dopamine stimulus available was the taste of ripe fruit after a long walk or the warmth of a fire after a cold night. Those experiences produced a modest dopamine release, perhaps 50 to 100% above your baseline, which felt deeply satisfying because your nervous system was calibrated to that range. And then, in the span of approximately 30 years, 4 industries engineered products that produced dopamine releases of 150 to 500% above baseline and delivered them directly to your pocket, your pantry, your pharmacy, and your phone. Social media platforms use variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the same reward pattern used in slot machines, to deliver unpredictable doses of social validation through likes, comments, shares, and notifications. The unpredictability is the key. Your brain releases more dopamine in anticipation of a possible reward than it does in response to a certain one. Every time you pull your phone out of your pocket to check whether someone liked your post, your brain fires a dopamine burst. Not when you see the like, when you check. The checking is the drug. And the average American checks their phone 96 times per day, according to a Surian. 96 dopamine microhits every day, for years. Ultra-processed food, which comprises 58% of the average American adult's caloric intake, is engineered to hit the bliss point, the precise combination of sugar, fat, and salt that maximizes consumption by overriding the brain's natural satiation signals. Every bite triggers a dopamine response that is significantly higher than anything a natural food produces. And the food industry spends approximately $14 billion per year on advertising to ensure you encounter these products constantly. And the gambling industry, which exploded after the Supreme Court struck down the federal sports betting ban in 2018, has put dopamine-exploiting slot machine mechanics inside an app on every phone in the country. Americans wagered over $120 billion on sports in 2023 alone. And the opioid system directly floods the brain with artificial reward signals at intensities that natural experience cannot approach, which is why 700,000 Americans have died from overdoses since 1999, and fentanyl is the leading cause of death for ages 18 to 45. And here is what all four of these industries have in common. They do not just provide pleasure, they recalibrate your pleasure system. Neuroscientists call this downregulation. When your brain is exposed to repeated supernormal stimuli, it reduces the number of dopamine receptors available to respond to future stimuli. Your baseline drops. The amount of stimulation required to feel anything at all increases. And the natural pleasures that used to satisfy you, a conversation with a friend, a walk in the park, a home-cooked meal, a sunset, a good book, no longer produce enough dopamine to register above your new artificially lowered baseline. They literally do not feel like anything. And you are left in the state that the man in the video described. Not depressed, not anxious, neutral. Unable to enjoy things that used to bring joy. Unable to explain why. Unable to fix it by trying harder, because trying harder is not the problem. The problem is biological. Your reward circuitry has been damaged by sustained exposure to artificial stimuli that your nervous system was never designed to process. And 330 million Americans are carrying around this damaged circuitry, going to work, coming home, scrolling, eating, scrolling, sleeping, and waking up to do it again. And the collective term for a population whose reward system has been downregulated by industrial-scale dopamine manipulation is not lazy, it is not unmotivated, it is not checked out. The term is anhedonia, the clinical inability to feel pleasure. And it is not a diagnosis you receive in a doctor's office. It is the ambient condition of an entire country. And the four industries that caused it are still operating, still advertising, still engineering, still extracting. And nobody is going to tell you to stop using their products because their quarterly earnings depend on your inability to put them down. The cost of simply being alive in the United States in 2026 has consumed so much of the average person's mental bandwidth that there is nothing left over for meaning or purpose or joy because the brain cannot process hope and survival math at the same time. There is a landmark study in behavioral economics that changed how psychologists understand poverty and cognitive function. It was conducted by Sendhil Mullainathan at Harvard and Eldar Shafir at Princeton and published in their book Scarcity. They demonstrated that financial scarcity does not just make you poorer, it makes you dumber, not permanently, situationally. They measured the cognitive bandwidth of people who were financially stressed and found that the mental load of managing insufficient resources, of deciding which bill to pay and which one to let go, of calculating whether you can afford both gas and groceries, of carrying the constant background computation of not enough, reduces effective IQ by approximately 13 to 14 points. That is the equivalent of losing an entire night's sleep, or being clinically impaired by alcohol. The person sitting at the kitchen table at 11 p.m. doing math on a phone calculator is not just stressed. Their brain is operating with 13 fewer IQ points than it would if the financial pressure were removed. And 45% of American households cannot make ends meet according to Brookings. That is approximately 58 million households, approximately 150 million Americans, walking around with a cognitive tax that nobody charged them for and nobody will remove. And the cost of living in 2026 has made that cognitive tax heavier than at any point in modern American history. Gas is at $4.55 nationally and $6.13 in California. Grocery prices have increased cumulatively by over 25% since 2020. The average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in a metropolitan area exceeds $1,700 per month. Health insurance premiums for a family average over $24,000 per year. Childcare costs $15,000 to $25,000 per year. Credit card debt is at $1.252 trillion at 23.79% APR. Total consumer debt hit an all-time record of $18.19 trillion. And the savings rate has fallen to 4%, which means there is no buffer, there is no cushion, there is no margin. Every dollar that comes in is allocated before it arrives because the fixed costs of survival consume the entire income. And when survival math consumes your entire cognitive bandwidth, there is nothing left for anything else. No bandwidth for creativity. No bandwidth for long-term planning. No bandwidth for dreaming about a future that is different from today. No bandwidth for hobbies or learning or exploration or the kind of mental wandering that produces innovation and art and human connection. The brain cannot process hope and survival math at the same time because both require the same prefrontal cortex resources. And survival always wins because survival is non-negotiable. Hope is optional. And so the hope gets deferred, day after day, week after week, year after year, until the deferral becomes the default, until the person stops hoping, not because they chose to, but because the cognitive space that hope requires has been permanently occupied by the calculation of which bills to pay, which meals to skip, and how many miles of gas are left in the tank. And the 21-year-old in the video who said there is no incentive anymore is not cynical. She is mathematically correct. For a generation entering an economy where the median home requires $110,000 in income they do not earn, where student debt is $1.77 trillion, where a degree no longer guarantees employment, where AI is automating the jobs they were trained for, and where credit card interest is consuming their income at 23.79%, the rational response is withdrawal. The emotional numbness is not a malfunction. It is the brain's correct assessment that the reward is not worth the effort because the system has made the reward inaccessible. And an entire generation doing that calculation simultaneously and arriving at the same answer is not a mental health crisis in the traditional sense. It is a market signal. It is 70 million people aged 18 to 35 telling the economy with their behavior that the product it is offering, which is a lifetime of labor in exchange for declining purchasing power, mounting debt, and no prospect of the security their grandparents achieved with a high school diploma, is a product they are not buying, not because they cannot afford it, because it is not worth the price. 165 million Americans report feeling lonely, and the Surgeon General said the health impact is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and the country is dying not from a disease, but from the absence of the one thing that makes life worth living. The United States Surgeon General Dr. V.K. Murthy did not issue an advisory about loneliness because it is uncomfortable. He issued it because it is lethal. The advisory, published in 2023, documented that approximately half of U.S. adults, roughly 165 million people, report experiencing measurable loneliness. And the health consequences are not metaphorical, they are clinical. Social isolation is associated with a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% increased risk of stroke, a 50% increased risk of developing dementia for older adults. And the overall mortality impact of loneliness is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. 15 cigarettes. That means loneliness is killing Americans at a rate comparable to one of the most well-documented carcinogens in human history. And it is affecting half the population. And nobody is regulating it. Nobody is putting a warning label on it. Nobody is taxing it. Nobody is running public health campaigns against it. Because loneliness is not caused by a product that can be banned. It is caused by the absence of a product that cannot be manufactured. Human connection, and the structures that used to produce human connection in the United States have been systematically dismantled over the last 40 years. Robert Putnam documented the decline in bowling alone in 2000, showing that membership in civic organizations, churches, clubs, unions, and community groups had been falling since the 1960s. And the decline has only accelerated since Putnam's book. Church attendance has dropped from 70% in 1999 to 45% in 2024. Union membership has fallen from 20% in 1983 to 10%. The Elks, the Rotary, the Kiwanis, the VFW, the local bowling league, the Friday night card game, the neighborhood block party, all of them have been replaced by algorithmic feeds that simulate connection without providing it. And the architecture of American life physically prevents spontaneous human contact. The suburbs that house a majority of the population were designed around the automobile, with single-family homes on cul-de-sacs connected by highways to commercial zones. No sidewalks, no town centers, no third places where people gather without the obligation to spend money. You drive from your garage to the office to the store to the garage, and the only faces you see are the ones on your screen. And the pandemic accelerated this isolation by years. The remote work revolution that was supposed to be liberating turned out to be isolating. The people who work from home full-time report higher rates of loneliness than those who commute to an office. Not because the office is a community, but because the commute at least forced incidental human contact. The barista who knows your order. The receptionist who says good morning. The coworker who asks about your weekend. Those micro-interactions, which feel insignificant individually, accumulate into a sense of belonging that the brain requires to function. And without them, the brain begins to deteriorate in measurable ways. The prefrontal cortex, which governs social behavior, empathy, and decision-making, shows reduced activity in chronically lonely individuals. The amygdala, which processes threat detection, becomes hyperactive, causing lonely people to perceive neutral social situations as threatening. Loneliness literally rewires the brain to make connection harder, which deepens the loneliness, which further rewires the brain in a self-reinforcing cycle that the individual cannot break through willpower alone. And this is the missing piece that explains why Americans are losing interest in everything. The loss of interest is not caused by the economy alone. It is not caused by the political system alone. It is caused by the absence of the one thing that makes enduring all of those other things possible: connection. The person who faces financial hardship with a community can endure it. The person who faces it alone cannot. The person who faces a broken political system with neighbors who share the burden can laugh about it, complain about it, organize against it. The person who faces it alone scrolls through outrage at midnight and feels the weight compress their chest. The person who faces a broken healthcare system with a friend who drives them to the appointment and sits in the waiting room can navigate it. The person who faces it alone avoids the appointment entirely because the loneliness has already rewired their brain to perceive the waiting room as a threat. Everything that is breaking in America breaks worse when it breaks in isolation, and half the country is isolated. And the isolation is not a side effect of the crisis. It is the crisis. The loneliness is the soil in which every other disease takes root, and the country is not dying from any single one of those diseases. It is dying from the absence of the one thing that makes survival possible: each other. The system does not want you to care because a population that cares is a population that organizes, and a population that organizes is the one thing that every extraction machine in the history of civilization has been designed to prevent. I need you to consider the possibility that the numbness you are feeling is not a side effect of the system. It is the product, the thing the system is manufacturing on purpose. Because a population that has lost interest in everything is the most profitable and the most manageable population that has ever existed. Think about what happens when people care. When people care, they pay attention to where their money goes. They read the label. They compare prices. They cancel subscriptions. They switch providers. They demand better service. They write reviews. They complain. They organize boycotts. They form unions. They run for school board. They show up to city council meetings. They ask questions that nobody in power wants to answer. Caring is expensive for the people at the top because caring populations hold systems accountable, and accountability reduces profit. A health insurance company makes more money when you do not read your policy. A credit card company makes more money when you do not understand compound interest. A pharmaceutical company makes more money when you do not question whether you need the third medication. A food company makes more money when you do not read the ingredient list. A social media platform makes more money when you do not track how many hours you spend scrolling. And a government makes more money when you do not vote, do not protest, do not organize, and do not demand that the $4.1 billion in lobbying be made illegal. Every system that extracts from you benefits from your disengagement. And the disengagement you are experiencing, the fog, the numbness, the I do not care anymore that the woman in the video described as a quiet exhaustion, is not a failure of the system. It is the system's highest achievement. Because the extraction machine does not need your enthusiasm, it does not need your consent, it does not need your participation, it needs your passivity. And passivity is what it has engineered through 30 years of dopamine hijacking, financial suffocation, information overload, political polarization, and social atomization. The dopamine hijacking made you unable to feel pleasure from natural sources, so you consume the artificial ones the machine sells. The financial suffocation consumed your cognitive bandwidth so you cannot think beyond the next bill. The information overload made every issue feel equally urgent and equally unsolvable, which produces the psychological state researchers call learned helplessness, the belief that nothing you do will change anything. The political polarization ensured that even if you wanted to organize, you could not agree with the person next to you on who the enemy is because both of you have been told the enemy is each other. And the social atomization ensured that even if you identified the real enemy, you have no community to organize with because the bowling league and the union and the church and the neighborhood block party were all replaced by an algorithm that profits from your isolation. And the result is 330 million people who are too numb to care, too broke to think, too overwhelmed to act, too divided to organize, and too isolated to find each other. That is not a mental health crisis. That is a control system. And the people running it do not need to be conspiratorial about it. They do not sit in a room and plan the numbness. They do not have to. Because every institution in the extraction economy is individually incentivized to produce the exact conditions that collectively generate the numbness. The food company wants you addicted to their product. The tech company wants you addicted to their platform. The financial company wants you indebted to their card. The pharmaceutical company wants you dependent on their pill. The media company wants you outraged by their content. And the government wants you too exhausted by all of it to notice that Congress has a 7% confidence rating and nobody is doing anything about it because the people who could do something about it are the same people who benefit from you not caring. Your numbness is their margin. Your fog is their freedom. Your loss of interest in everything is the condition that allows everything to continue exactly as it is. And the moment you start caring again is the moment the system faces the one thing it was not designed to withstand. A population that is awake. The fog is real. The numbness is real. The exhaustion is real. But the spell breaks the same way every time. One small act that the machine did not tell you to do. And that act is older than every system that is failing you. I am going to be honest with you about something that I do not say in most of my videos because most of my videos are about data and systems and patterns and trajectories. But this video is different because this video is about you. About the feeling in your chest that you could not name until 20 minutes ago when I told you it was called languishing. About the reward system that stopped working because 4 industries spent billions breaking it. About the bandwidth that was consumed by survival math until there was nothing left for hope. About the loneliness that rewired your brain to perceive connection as a threat. About the system that profits from your fog and needs you to stay inside it. And I know that right now you are sitting wherever you are sitting and you are feeling the weight of everything I have described, and part of you is thinking this is too big. This is too deep. This is too structural. There is nothing I can do about a system that was designed to make me numb. And I need you to hear me when I say that is the lie. That thought, that exact thought is the product. That is the learned helplessness. Talking, that is the system's voice in your head telling you that because the problem is large, your response must be large or it does not count. And that is not true. The spell breaks small. It always breaks small. It breaks when you cook a meal from whole ingredients instead of ordering delivery and you taste the food you made with your own hands, and your dopamine system, for the first time in weeks, responds to a natural stimulus instead of an engineered one. It breaks when you put your phone in a drawer for 2 hours and sit on your porch and hear the birds and feel the air and notice that the sky is a color that your screen has never accurately reproduced. It breaks when you walk to your neighbor's door and knock and say, "I have not seen you in a while, and I wanted to check on you." And the look on their face tells you that nobody has checked on them in months, and the connection that forms in that 30-second interaction produces more real dopamine than 96 phone checks combined. It breaks when you cancel one subscription and redirect $15 to a jar on your kitchen counter, and the jar fills slowly, and the filling of the jar becomes the first thing you have looked forward to in a year, because it is yours, and it is real, and it is not mediated by a screen or a platform or an algorithm. It breaks when you learn one skill. 1. How to patch drywall, how to change your oil, how to grow tomatoes in a bucket, how to make bread from flour and water and yeast. The skill is not the point. The point is that you made something with your hands that did not exist before you touched it, and the act of making it reminded your brain that you are a human being who creates, not a consumption unit that absorbs. It breaks when you go to bed at 10 p.m. instead of midnight, and you do not check your phone, and you sleep for 8 hours, and you wake up and the fog is one shade lighter, not gone. Lighter. And lighter is enough, because lighter is the direction, and direction is the thing you lost inside the numbness, not the ability to function. You are still functioning. The ability to move in a direction that feels like yours. And here is the truth that no system can extract from you, and no algorithm can downregulate, and no lobbying budget can suppress. You are still here, inside the fog, inside the numbness, inside the quiet exhaustion that 165 million other Americans are carrying right now, but you are still here. And the fact that you watched this entire video, that you did not scroll away, that you stayed, tells me something about you that the system does not want you to know. You still care. The caring is buried under the fog. It is suppressed by the dopamine damage. It is suffocated by the survival math. It is isolated by the loneliness, but it is there. Because if it were not there, you would not have watched this video. You would have scrolled past it the way you scroll past everything else. But you did not. You stayed. And staying is the first act of resistance against a system that needs you to keep scrolling. So here is what I am asking you to do. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Put the phone in a drawer. Cook something simple. Knock on a door. Sit on your porch. Write one sentence about how you feel. Call someone you have not talked to in a while. Not to fix anything. Just to say I was thinking about you. Because the fog lifts one human act at a time. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Not cinematically. The way a sunrise happens. So slowly that you do not see it moving. But you look up, and the sky is different. And you realize the dark was not permanent. It just felt that way, because you were inside it.